Tim Jones, and someone who I follow religiously, joins me now. He is none other than the great Dinesh D'Souza, DineshD'Souza.com. You can find him on Twitter at Dinesh D'Souza. He is the author of, I think, close to 15 books, many films, and the new book, which is out, which pulling it up here, extremely timely. The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. Dinesh, thank you so much for joining me on a holiday weekend.
Hey, it's a pleasure. Good to be on the show.
Yeah, Dinesh, actually, I know you do so much travel and speaking around the country. I got to meet you about a year ago. You came to St. Louis for one of our very own representatives, Paul Kurtman, and I introduced you at his big event. He had about 400, 500 people in the room that came to see you that night.
I remember it was an awesome event. I was delighted to be part of it.
Yeah, it was great to meet you and your lovely wife, and I want to thank you again for speaking with me here tonight. So, Dinesh, you must be a little bit of a prophet too, because I believe this book was out long before some of the calamities we're seeing this year in our country, right?
Well, remarkably, the book came out about a month ago, so it came out right before the Charlottesville business. It came out right before these Antifa riots in places like Berkeley. Now, of course, I had seen since Trump's election the word fascist and Nazi thrown around by the left. You couldn't even turn on the television without seeing Van Jones or Bill Maher or Rachel Maddow bloviating about fascism and pointing the finger at the right. Fascism is a phenomenon, they say, of the right. And that's what I take on in this book, and I show that it's a big lie, and that in reality, fascism and Nazism have always been on the left. So ideologically, historically, tactically, if we're trying to pin the fascist tail on somebody, it's going to have to go on the Democratic donkey.
You know, Dinesh, I could not agree with you more, and I know that you get your share of grief on Twitter and social media as well, because you're right. The far left-wing progressives always argue with me, as I'm sure they argue with you, that, it's impossible for people on the left to be fascist. That's impossible. That's Nazism, and Nazis are the far right, and they base that on, this old history of World War II, and they say, that argument's over. And I say, well, maybe the old hippie liberals weren't fascist, but you new left-wing progressive liberals are extremely fascist because you're the ones trying to shut this free speech down. So, Dinesh, explain, please, for all my critics and yours once again, how it is that the left is rooted in fascism.
Well, the core meaning of fascism has gotten a little muddied today, but it's gotten muddied deliberately because progressives have muddied it up. So, for example, Hitler was a National Socialist. He changed the name of the German Workers' Party to the German National Socialist Workers' Party to emphasize the socialism. Somehow the left has taken the socialism out of National Socialism. The real founder of fascism was Mussolini, who established the first fascist regime in the world in Italy in 1922. And Mussolini was a Marxist, and he was the most famous Marxist in Italy, the editor of the Socialist Party magazine called Avanti. And he was recognized to be on the left. In fact, when Mussolini came to power, he received a telegram of congratulations from Lenin. Why? Because Lenin recognized Mussolini as a fellow revolutionary on the left. So my point is, until World War II, all of this was very well known. Fascism was known to be on the left by both its supporters and its critics. It's only after the war that the big lie set in, and the left began to sort of disguise the meaning of fascism, create almost, you could call it a fake fascism, so that they could try to pin it on the right.
Talking to Dinesh D'Souza, the author of his new book, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. And Dinesh, I think this also kind of dovetails with the fact that, the modern left-wing liberal wants to also completely bury the history of the Democratic Party as the true party, I've also argued, of racism.
The Democrats are undoubtedly the party of slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, racial terrorism, and the Ku Klux Klan. And we're not just talking about ancient history. As late as the 1960s, the main opposition to the civil rights movement by which I mean the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Bill, came from the Democratic Party. Now, what's pretty incredible is that the Democrats have never admitted this. They've never taken responsibility for their own history. They've never apologized for it. And part of what we saw in Charlottesville and in the aftermath is a very clever effort by the left to shift the blame for the Democratic Party's historic culpability onto the South. This is one reason they keep talking about Confederate monuments, Confederate this and Confederate that. Most of those Confederate monuments being pulled down are monuments to notorious Democrats.
That's right, including, I'd love to hear, there's never any discussion, and you exposed, I've seen you write about this, and you've exposed this, Hillary Clinton's mentor, when she was going through her political indoctrination, was none other than former Senator, now deceased, Robert Byrd, right, who was a grand poobah, or whatever they call it, of the KKK.
Yeah, Byrd was very high up in the West Virginia Ku Klux Klan. And very interestingly, Obama and Bill Clinton were at his funeral, and Bill Clinton made a very revealing statement. He, in effect, said, don't be too hard on old Robert Byrd for being in the Klan, because you had to be in the Klan in order to advance in the Democratic Party. Think about that. You had to be in the Klan.
It's unreal.
So it's pretty incredible that, the Democrats try now to say, hey, we found a ragtag white supremacist and a white ragtag Ku Klux Klansman, and they were wearing a Trump hat, when the Klan had real power. In the 1920s, the Klan marched 50,000 hooded Klansmen right up Fifth Avenue in New York City. Where were they going? To the Democratic National Convention, where a whole bunch of them were delegates.
Absolutely. And Dinesh, it's great that we have you on this week, because not only Charlottesville, and you're saying how, and you're right, this is a continuum. It's not, that's what the modern day Democrats always want to say is, oh, this was ancient history, this was in the past. It's all happening again now. Witness what we had this week, which I found this interesting at the very least, and almost remarkable. So Nancy Pelosi comes out this week and finally feels that she needs to condemn Antifa, the anti-fascists, who seem to be the most fascist group around. What do you think that is all about?
I think what it's all about is that for a while here, the Democrats like Pelosi were really enjoying having a group like Antifa be their paramilitary wing. Just think about this. Just as the Ku Klux Klan was the paramilitary wing of the Democratic Party in the 1920s, Antifa were the masked thugs that were, in a sense, doing the Democratic Party's dirty work now. But I think what's happened is that Antifa, with all these, today in the age of social media, where you can see all this video of these masked thugs carrying weapons, beating up, veterans in wheelchairs, I think suddenly Nancy Pelosi goes, do I really want this to be the image of the Democratic Party going into the midterm election of 2018? So I think they're having some qualms, not because of any moral reconsideration, but simply tactically they may have realized that this is making them look really bad.
Speaking to Dinesh D'Souza, author, filmmaker, one of the greatest public political minds of our age, DineshD'Souza.com, at Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, we've talked about the past, we've talked about the present. I want to talk to you, before I let you go, a little bit about where do you think this is all going? I mean, you're someone who you relish going to college campuses like some of our other great conservative minds these days, because that's where we're supposed to have free speech rights exemplified the most. But we've seen the riots in Berkeley that seem to pop up not just once a year now, but almost every other month, where Antifa and the far left radical fascist wing of that group burns cars and disrupts and in some cases keeps speakers out. My first question for you, have you had any experiences like that you could talk to us about? How did you address it? And secondly, now that Nancy Pelosi's condemned Antifa, are they going to fade away? Are they going to dig in? Where do you see this all going?
Well, first of all, I think that Antifa will keep doing what it's doing as long as it continues to work. And so, for example, as long as they are able to drive conservative speakers off campus, as they have been at Berkeley, for example, they'll keep doing it. Second of all, we've got to worry not just about the thugs on the street, but the thugs who are in power, who are supporting them. This is why, for example, the white nationalists in Charlottesville are actually less dangerous than Antifa, because the white nationalists in Charlottesville don't have cultural or political power. They don't have powerful allies in the mayor's office and in the media and in the Democratic Party. Now, this guy, Jesse Aragon, who's the mayor of Berkeley, is apparently himself a member of an Antifa Facebook group. He's the guy who told the cops to stand down to, quote, give Antifa room to maneuver. So the point I've always made is that the fascism of the institutions is more dangerous than the fascism of the street. The Hollywood boss who can drive people out of the industry, the dean who controls billion-dollar endowments, or people like Obama and Hillary who use the organs of the state, the FBI, the Justice Department, the IRS against their critics. That's the most dangerous type of fascism in our age.
Speaking to Dinesh D'Souza, at Dinesh D'Souza on Twitter, DineshD'Souza.com, his new book, The Big Lie, available right now, BigLieBook.com. Hey, Dinesh, last question for you. What would be your advice for conservatives who are probably a little wary these days of going to any political event? I think you might say that Antifa's if Antifa is causing fear in conservatives, then they're being successful, right? And so, what does this say about our First Amendment rights in this country, our freedom of assembly? How would you advise the conservative who is a big fan of yours and is reading your book and seeing all this? And it's all a little disturbing, but I think there's a silent majority out there that elected Donald Trump that is still very much engaged.
Yes, I agree. I do think that the first step is to be informed. I mean, a few years ago, the former head of the Republican National Committee, Ken Mehlman, was going to black churches apologizing for the racist history of the Republican Party. Now, this poor guy obviously didn't realize the Republican Party has no racist history. So if you don't inform yourself, you're going to be suckered by big lies. That's the first step, to learn. The second step, I think, is to really enforce the law across the board. Now the white supremacist who drove his car into the woman crossing the street, he's going to get his comeuppance. But it's really important that these inaugural rioters, 220 of them were arrested after Trump's inauguration. By the way, 11 of them were journalists. Most of these leftists, they expect to be, put in jail overnight so that they can come out as martyrs in the morning, appear on MSNBC the next night. No, we should impose some sentences on these guys. Once they start getting a year or two in prison, this Antifa stuff will be held accountable.
Dinesh, thank you so much for your time tonight, and especially on a holiday weekend. Is the best place to find your book at thebigliebook.com?
Well, the book's on the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, it's available everywhere, not just the obvious places like Amazon, but also in Costco and Walmart.
Awesome.
And certainly you can go to my website as well.
Spreading free speech as we speak. Hey, Dinesh, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Have a great one. That was the great Dinesh D'Souza. I hope you all enjoyed that. That was a real treat for me. Dinesh D'Souza, BigLieBook.com, exposing the Nazi roots of the American left. Tim Jones exposing it along with him. We'll be back right after this.
This is the Tim Jones Show.
These Trump fans, they're hardcore.
On FM News Talk 97.1.
The news of the day.
This week it's Robert E. Lee.
Every